was supposed to be a day of celebration, a day to remember forever. Our high school stood tall and proud against the bright morning sky, its halls buzzing with excitement. Everywhere you looked, there was joy. The graduating class, my class, had worked so hard to get to this moment. We'd laughed, cried, and struggled together over the years. That morning, as we gathered in our caps and gowns, there was so much hope in the air. We talked about our plans for the future, some of us going off to college, some starting jobs, others chasing dreams that felt almost impossible. Parents and friends filled the gymnasium, their cameras ready, smiles plastered on their faces. The whole place felt alive, a mixture of pride and excitement crackling like static electricity. But no one knew that day would take a turn none of us could have ever imagined. It started small. A delay in the schedule. The principal, who was always punctual, wasn't on stage when he should have been. We all thought it was just nerves or a last-minute hiccup, but then something odd happened. A teacher rushed past the rows of students, whispering to another staff member, her face pale. The ceremony had barely begun when the confusion hit us. Whispers turned into murmurs, then into gasps. I remember looking around and seeing faces twist in confusion. A strange announcement echoed over the speakers, something about staying calm. That's when people began to notice. Some of the seats, no, many of the seats were empty. It didn't make sense. Where were the others? Families stood up, craning their necks, calling out names. A few parents pushed through the aisles, their voices growing louder, more frantic. The gymnasium filled with a tense, almost suffocating energy. We were all there just moments ago, together, laughing and talking. Now, they were gone. Some of my classmates, my friends, just vanished. Their absence hung heavy in the room, like a sudden drop in temperature. No one had answers, and the growing panic spread like wildfire. The police arrived quickly, or at least it felt that way. Their uniforms brought no comfort, though. There was too much chaos. Officers tried to control the crowd, asking people to stay calm, but how could we? Families were crying, friends were screaming, and no one knew what to do. The authorities searched every corner of the school that day. They combed through classrooms, the parking lot, even the nearby woods. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their searchlights sweeping across the fields, but nothing. Not a single clue. The community was in shock. This was our small, quiet town, a place where nothing ever happened. And now kids had vanished into thin air. The news spread fast, reporters swarming the school. Cameras captured the confusion, the fear. Watching it all unfold on TV later that night, it felt like I was trapped in someone else's nightmare. And yet, there were no answers. The missing students were just gone. The days that followed were heavy with grief. Parents clung to hope, but you could see the strain in their eyes. The school became a ghost town. The laughter and chatter that used to fill the halls were replaced with silence, whispers, and the occasional sob. I couldn't stop thinking about my friends. Were they out there somewhere, scared and alone? Or was it worse? The questions gnawed at me, at all of us. Rumors spread like wildfire, some saying it was an accident, others whispering about something darker. The truth, though, stayed out of reach. The teachers tried to move on, but even they seemed lost. You could feel the weight of the missing in every corner of the town. Empty desks in classrooms, untouched lockers, grieving families who didn't know if they should mourn or hold on to hope. It's been years now, but that day hasn't let me go. People in town still talk about it, though not as openly as they used to. Some say it was a government experiment gone wrong, others blame something supernatural. No one knows for sure, and maybe no one ever will. Sometimes I catch myself looking at old photos, those smiling faces, so full of life. I think about the empty seats at the ceremony, the questions that never got answered. The not knowing is the worst part. We all want closure. The families deserve that much. I don't think any of us will ever truly move on, not until we find out what happened. Until then, the shadow of that day lingers, haunting us, reminding us of everything we lost. And maybe, just maybe, The answers are still out there, waiting to be uncovered. But until then, we live in the dark. I've always loved books. They're my escape, my sanctuary. That's why I became a librarian. The smell of old pages, the quiet hum of the library, it's always been home to me. But that night, I discovered something that made me wish I'd never stepped foot inside. It started like any other evening. I stayed late to finish filing some returned books, the last patron having left hours ago. The lights in the library were dim, casting long shadows between the shelves. The air felt heavier than usual, but I chalked it up to exhaustion. I was just about to call it a night when I noticed it. Tucked away in a corner of the archive, where the oldest and most forgotten books are kept, was a leather-bound tome I'd never seen before. Its cover was cracked and dark, almost black, and it seemed to absorb the faint light around it. My first thought was that someone had misplaced it, but as I reached for it, a chill ran up my arm. The air grew colder, and for a moment I hesitated. Something about the book felt wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. My fingers brushed the leather, and a jolt of energy shot through me, sharp and electric. I yanked my hand back, heart pounding. That's when I noticed the mark of faint, curling symbol etched into the skin of my palm. It burned like a fresh brand. I should have walked away. I should have locked the archive door and gone home. But I didn't. I was drawn to it, like it was calling to me. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The leather felt cold and damp, almost alive under my fingers. The book's weight pressed down on me, heavier than it should have been, like it carried centuries of secrets. I opened it. The pages were brittle, filled with faded writing in a language I didn't recognize. Strange symbols crawled across the paper like insects. Despite the unease gnawing at me, I couldn't look away. My lips moved before I realized what I was doing, the words spilling out in a whisper. As I read, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs, and the shadows around me seemed to thicken and stretch. The air pressed against my chest, heavy and suffocating. Then I heard it. At first it was faint, like the rustle of leaves. But as I kept reading, the sound grew clearer. Whispers, low, guttural, and cold. They echoed in my ears, but there was no one there. It was the book. The whispers were coming from the book. I slammed it shut, my heart racing. The whispers stopped, but the room didn't feel right. I put the book down, but I could still feel its pull, like it was alive and waiting. The mark on my hand throbbed, a dull ache that wouldn't go away. That night I couldn't sleep. The whispers followed me home, faint but constant. I'd hear my name in the dark, soft and teasing. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, and the mark on my hand seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. I started having dreams, no nightmares. In them, I was standing in the library, surrounded by books that whispered and screamed. And at the center of it all was the tome, its pages open, and something inside it, watching me. The next day, I tried to leave it alone. I locked the archive and avoided that corner of the library, but it didn't help. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They weren't just in my ears anymore, they were in my head, filling my thoughts with dark images and terrible ideas. It was like the book was digging into my mind, searching for something. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get rid of it. I grabbed the book and took it to the library's incinerator, but when I threw it into the flames, nothing happened. The fire roared and hissed, but the book remained untouched. Desperate, I tried to rip the pages, drown it in water, even bury it, but it was indestructible. The mark on my hand burned hotter with every failed attempt, as if mocking me. I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I reached out to an old friend, a scholar named Peter, who had a knack for the occult. When I showed him the book, his face turned pale. He recognized it immediately a grimoire, an ancient book of dark magic. He told me it wasn't just dangerous, it was alive. It fed on fear, on despair, and it was trying to use me as a conduit for something far worse. Peter and I spent days researching, poring over texts and rituals to find a way to contain the book. Meanwhile, the whispers grew louder, more demanding. They promised power, knowledge, anything I wanted, if I'd just give in. At night, I'd wake up with the book in my hands, open to pages I didn't remember turning. The final confrontation came late one night. Peter and I performed a binding ritual, using every ounce of knowledge we had. The room shook as we chanted, the air thick with an unnatural energy. The book fought back, its pages flaring with a dark light, the whispers rising to deafening screams. My head felt like it would split open, and for a moment I thought we'd fail. But then it stopped. The book snapped shut, the light vanished, and the room fell silent. The mark on my hand faded to a faint scar. We'd done it. The book was contained, but it wasn't destroyed. Peter warned me that destroying it might release its power into the world, so it had to be guarded hidden where no one else could find it. That task fell to me. Now, the book sits locked away in a special vault beneath the library, bound with wards and seals. I'm its guardian, whether I like it or not. The library feels different now. The air is heavier, the shadows darker. Sometimes I think I hear faint whispers like the book is calling to me. I've changed too. I'm more cautious, more afraid. But there's something else, something I don't like to admit. Sometimes I miss the whispers, and that scares me most of all. The haunting of my old school. The first time I stepped into the schoolyard, even as a child, I felt it the weight of something unseen pressing against the air. The building itself loomed, ancient and tired, its brick walls streaked with dark stains that seemed like tears frozen in time. It wasn't just age that gave it its grim presence, it was something deeper. Something alive in its stillness. This place had history, dark and tragic. It was built over a century ago, long before anyone cared about the whispers of the land's original inhabitants or the violent disputes that stained the soil. Stories passed down spoke of a fire in the early 1900s, trapping children in the East Wing. Their screams said to linger in the charred walls. Then there was the tale of a teacher who, overcome with grief, ended her own life in the bell tower, and of course the countless unconfirmed stories from students and staff, shadows that shouldn't be there. Whispers in empty hallways, and doors slamming on their own. I couldn't say I believed it all back then. Not completely. But as I stood outside, staring at its crooked windows and the way they seemed to follow me, I felt a chill run down my spine. The first step inside felt like stepping into another world. The air was heavy, still, and stale with the scent of decay. Dust danced in the faint beams of light breaking through cracked windows. The hallways stretched endlessly, their silence oppressive. I started my exploration with the old gymnasium. They said a janitor once saw figures moving across the bleachers late at night, figures that vanished when he approached. Standing there, I could almost hear the faint echo of laughter and the slap of sneakers on the wooden floor, even though the place had been abandoned for decades. The East Wing was another story entirely. This was where the fire had been, and the air felt colder, the shadows darker. I stood at the entrance, flashlight in hand, and I swear I felt something brush past me. The beam of light trembled as I aimed it down the corridor. The walls were blackened, scarred by the flames, but there was more handprints, small and ghostly, etched into the soot like a silent cry for help. Then, there was the bell tower. The climb up the narrow stairs felt endless, each step groaning under my weight. The room at the top was suffocatingly small, with a single window overlooking the schoolyard. It was here, they said, that the teacher had ended her life, and many claimed to have seen her figure staring down at them from this very spot. I stood there, frozen, feeling eyes on me though I was alone. The hairs on my neck rose, and I swear I heard the faintest sound of weeping. It wasn't just the stories that made this place unsettling, it was what I felt. The first time I walked these halls as a student, I remember feeling watched, as if the walls themselves had eyes. There were moments when the temperature would drop suddenly, leaving me shivering even in the height of summer. Once, during detention, I sat alone in a classroom when the sound of footsteps echoed outside the door. I called out, but no one answered. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, circling the room. I bolted out of there, my heart pounding, and found nothing but silence waiting for me in the hall. Another time, a group of us dared each other to stay in the East Wing after dark. We heard laughter childlike soft, but distinctly wrong. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then, a loud crash echoed down the hall, and we ran, stumbling over each other in our haste to escape. But the most chilling experience came when I was alone in the bell tower. I had climbed up again, this time to see if I could feel her presence, the teacher. As I stood there, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned, expecting to see a friend or maybe a trick of the wind, but no one was there. The room was empty, yet I wasn't alone. What causes a place to hold on to such darkness? I've thought about it a lot, especially after my own experiences. Some say it's residual energy emotions so powerful that they leave a mark, replaying over and over like a broken record. Others believe these are spirits, souls trapped between worlds, unable or unwilling to move on. For this school, the tragedies seem to speak for themselves. A fire that claimed innocent lives, a life lost to despair, and a history steeped in sorrow. These are the ingredients of haunting, aren't they? Local folklore adds another layer to the mystery. Some believe the land itself is cursed, that before the school was built, it was a site of violence and bloodshed. Whatever the reason, it's clear this place is more than just an old building. It's a graveyard of memories, a monument to pain, and perhaps a doorway to something we can't fully understand. As I left the school for the last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, the silence heavier. Even now, when I think of that place, I feel its grip on me. It's not fear exactly, but a deep, unsettling awareness that the line between the living and the dead is thinner than we think. I don't know if I'll ever go back. Part of me wants to face whatever lingers there. But another part, the smarter part, knows that some doors are best left closed. What do you think? Have you ever felt that same chill, that same pull toward the unknown? If you have, I'd love to hear your stories. Maybe together, we can piece together the truth about places like this, places that refuse to be forgotten. For now, the school stands silent and waiting, its windows reflecting the light of a world it no longer belongs to. And as I walked away, I could swear I heard it again, that faint, sorrowful weeping carried on the wind.